Have you ever wondered how the universe began? Why humanity constantly struggles with sin and suffering? Or how an ancient book written over thousands of years could hold the key to understanding life itself? This is the story of the Old Testament, the foundation of the Bible where everything begins. It's a story of creation, rebellion, miracles, and prophecy. A grand narrative that leads to the most anticipated moment in history, the coming of the Messiah. The Old Testament consists of 39 books divided into 4 main sections: the Law, the historical books, the wisdom books, and the prophets. These books tell the story of God's relationship with humanity, the rise and fall of Israel, and the promise of a Savior who will one day restore what was lost. It all starts with Genesis. In the beginning, there was nothing. Then God spoke, and the universe was created. Light burst forth into darkness, the seas were formed, the mountains rose, and life filled the earth. God created Adam and Eve, the first humans, and placed them in a perfect paradise, the Garden of Eden. But this perfection would not last. A single act of disobedience changed everything. Tempted by the serpent, Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, bringing sin, suffering, and death into the world. The relationship between God and humanity was broken, and mankind was cast out of Eden, forced to live in a world of toil and hardship. As time passed, humanity spiraled deeper into corruption. Violence and wickedness spread across the earth, and God decided to start over. He chose one righteous man, Noah, and commanded him to build an ark. Then came the flood. Rain poured from the heavens, covering the entire world. Every living thing perished, except for Noah, his family, and the animals aboard the ark. After 40 days, the waters receded, and God made a promise. Never again would he destroy the earth by flood. As a sign of his covenant, he placed a rainbow in the sky. But humanity's sin did not end there. People sought to build a tower to reach the heavens, defying God's authority. In response, God confused their languages, scattering them across the earth. Yet, despite mankind's rebellion, God had a plan. He chose one man, Abraham, and made him a promise. His descendants would become a great nation, and through them, all the world would be blessed. This was the beginning of Israel, God's chosen people. Abraham's grandson Jacob, later renamed Israel, had 12 sons. One of them, Joseph, was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. But what they meant for harm, God used for good. Joseph rose to power in Egypt, and through him, God saved countless lives during a great famine. His family moved to Egypt, and for generations the Israelites prospered. But then a new Pharaoh rose to power, and the Israelites were enslaved. For 400 years, they suffered under Egyptian oppression until God raised up a deliverer, Moses. Through a series of 10 plagues, God demonstrated his power, forcing Pharaoh to release the Israelites. But their journey was not over. As they fled, Pharaoh changed his mind and sent his army after them. Then the impossible happened. Moses stretched out his staff, and the Red Sea parted. The Israelites walked through on dry land while the waters crashed down behind them, drowning Pharaoh's army. Now free, the Israelites arrived at Mount Sinai, where God gave them the 10 Commandments. These laws would shape the identity of Israel and set them apart from other nations. But despite witnessing God's miracles, the people rebelled. They built a golden calf, complained about their hardships, and doubted God's promises. Because of their disobedience, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, before finally reaching the Promised Land. Under Joshua, they conquered Canaan, but their faithfulness did not last. Without strong leadership, they fell into a cycle of sin. They turned away from God, were oppressed by enemy nations, cried out for help, and God sent a judge to rescue them. This pattern repeated for hundreds of years. Samson, Gideon, and Deborah were among these judges, but the people kept falling back into disobedience. Eventually, they demanded a king, rejecting God's rule. The first king, Saul, started strong but became arrogant and was rejected by God. He was replaced by David, the shepherd boy who defeated Goliath and became Israel's greatest king. He united the nation, established Jerusalem as its capital, and was a man after God's own heart. But even David was not perfect. His sin with Bathsheba led to turmoil in his family. His son Solomon became king and built the magnificent temple of God, making Israel a wealthy and powerful nation. But despite his wisdom, Solomon turned away from God, worshiping foreign gods and marrying many wives. After his death, the kingdom split in two. The northern kingdom, Israel, was consumed by idolatry and was eventually conquered by Assyria. The southern kingdom, Judah, fared slightly better, but also fell into sin. Prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel warned the people to turn back to God, but they refused. As a result, Babylon invaded, destroyed Jerusalem, and burned the temple to the ground. The Israelites were taken into exile for 70 years. The once great nation of Israel was gone. But God had not abandoned them. During the exile, prophets foretold the coming of Messiah, a Savior who would restore Israel and bring salvation to the world. After 70 years, the Persian king Cyrus allowed the Israelites to return home. They rebuilt the temple, but it was a shadow of its former glory. The people longed for the fulfillment of the prophecies, but for 400 years, God remained silent. No prophets, no miracles, no revelations, just waiting. The Old Testament ends in anticipation, with the people of Israel longing for the one who was promised, the Messiah, who would bring redemption. The Old Testament is not just a collection of ancient stories. It is a grand narrative of creation, rebellion, judgment, and redemption. It reveals God's power, justice, and mercy. It shows the repeated failure of humanity and God's unrelenting love. Every event, from Adam and Eve's fall to Israel's exile, points toward one thing: the coming of Jesus Christ. The Old Testament sets the stage for the greatest moment in history. The Messiah is coming, and the world will never be the same.